We sold your house to teach you respect, Mom sneered. The new owners move in next week. I didn't say a word, just stayed calm, remembering the meeting with Dad's lawyer and the secret trust he'd set up for me. Good luck with that, I replied, walking away. They were in for one hell of a surprise when they found out who really owned the house. I'm Alex, 27 years old. And last year my own father and stepmother sold my childhood home right out from under me to teach me a lesson. Before I recount how I turned the tables on them in the most public and humiliating way imaginable, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. The call came on a Tuesday. I remember because I was just about to present a new building design to my firm's biggest client. My phone buzzed, displaying the name Sarah, my stepmother. A cold knot formed in my stomach. We didn't have the kind of relationship where she telephoned just to chat. Alex, she stated, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet satisfaction that made the hairs on my arms stand erect. I have some news. Your father and I have decided to sell the house. I gripped my office phone, my knuckles turning white. The Greystone, my mother's house, my home. What are you talking about? We're teaching you about respect, Alex, and financial reality. You can't just expect things to be handed to you forever. I could hear my father, Richard, murmuring his agreement in the background, a dull, spineless sound. The new owners, she gloated, are arriving next week. They've secured a fantastic cash offer. For a second, the world went silent. All I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears. My own father, the man who was supposed to protect me, protect my mother's memory, he was allowing this to happen. He was part of it. The betrayal felt like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. Then, through the red haze of anger, a memory surfaced. Promise, my father's face, pale and thin in a hospital bed, his voice a ragged whisper. See Harrison. Trust Elizabeth. I took a deep breath, forcing the tremor out of my voice. The calm that settled over me was cold, hard, and absolute. Good luck with that, I stated, and ended the call. The line went dead. I stood there, staring at the phone. My hand was trembling. Not with fear, but with rage. I turned and slammed my fist into the drywall of my office. The sharp pain that shot up my arm was a welcome distraction. It was real, it was grounding. And as the pain subsided, it was replaced by a single burning thought. They had initiated a conflict. They just didn't realize I was the sole one with any ammunition. I looked at my bruised knuckles, then back at the phone. Promise is a promise, Dad. I whispered to the empty room. I promise. I didn't know it then, but this was just the beginning. I had no idea how deep the deceptions ran or what I would have to become to uncover them. The first call I made after punching that hole in my wall wasn't to a lawyer, it was to an airline. Within an hour, I had a one-way ticket to Chicago for a flight departing that evening. My boss, a good man named Mr. Davis, saw the look on my face and simply nodded. Go, family first. Your project will be here when you get back. The flight was a blur of recycled air and the low drone of jet engines. It was the perfect environment for specters as the plane climbed through the clouds, leaving the lights of Stamford behind. My mind drifted back. It always drifted back to the house. The Greystone wasn't just a building, it was my entire childhood. It was the scent of my mother's lemon polish and the sound of my father's drafting pencil scratching against vellum in his study. My mom, Elizabeth, was a brilliant architect, and the house was her masterpiece. She'd spent years restoring it, not just to its former glory, but beyond it. She taught me how every beam, every piece of crown molding had a story. A house has a soul, Alex, she'd say, her hand on my shoulder as we observed the intricate woodwork she had just brought back to life. You just have to be quiet enough to hear it. She was the home's heart, and my dad, Richard, was its steady hand. We were a team, the three of us. Then cancer arrived. It was quiet at first. Then it was a storm that tore through our lives, and when it passed, it took my mother with it. I was 16. The house suddenly felt immense and empty. The soul Mom had talked about went silent. My dad and I were just a ghost rattling around in a mausoleum of memories. He was lost. I see that now. He was a man drowning in grief, and he would have grasped onto any piece of driftwood to stay afloat. That driftwood was Sarah. She entered our lives 2 years later, bright, loud, and full of opinions. She was the polar opposite of my mother. Where my mom saw history, Sarah saw outdated fixtures. Where my mom saw character, Sarah saw an opportunity to renovate. She brought her son, Ben, with her, a boy a few years older than me who walked with the unearned confidence of someone who had never been told no. The changes started small, a new couch here, a different rug there. Then one day, I returned home from school to find the large, beautiful oil painting of my mother that hung in the main hall was gone. In its place was a sterile, abstract piece of modern art. Where's the painting? I inquired, my voice tight. Sarah waved a dismissive hand. Oh, that old thing, it's in the attic. It was just so somber. We need to brighten this place up. I Looked at my dad, he wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared into his coffee cup as if it held the answers to the universe. That was the moment I understood he wasn't just permitting it. He was choosing it. He was choosing the new, bright, easy life Sarah offered over the difficult, painful world of memory. He was choosing to erase my mother. That was the day I started planning my escape. I applied to colleges on the other side of the country. I needed distance. I needed to breathe air that wasn't thick with betrayal. The plane's intercom crackled, announcing our initial descent into O'Hare. The memories faded, replaced by the grim reality of the present. I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. My Aunt Clara, my dad's sister. She picked up on the second ring. Alex, her voice was cautious. We hadn't spoken much since I'd left for college. Sarah had been ruthlessly efficient at isolating my dad from his own family, portraying them as critical and unsupportive. Aunt Clara, I stated, keeping my voice low. I'm on a plane to Chicago, Sarah called. She said they're selling the house. There was a long pause on the other end of the line when she spoke. Her voice was cold and hard, all pretense of caution gone. I knew this day would come. That woman is a viper. Then she added a warning that chilled me more than Sarah's gloating. Alex, listen to me. Be careful, be smart, don't trust anything she says, and for God's sake, don't show her your cards. This is not just about a house with her, it never is. What do you mean? Just be careful. She reiterated, and the line went dead. I leaned my head against the cold plastic of the airplane window. The lights of Chicago spread out below me like a blanket of scattered jewels. It was the city where I was born, the city that held everything I had ever loved and lost. And I was flying back not for a reunion but for a conflict. Aunt Clara's words echoed in my head. This is not just about a house. At the time, I thought I understood. I was wrong. I was about to discover just how much more there was to lose. Getting from the airport to my childhood home was like driving into a nightmare. Every street, every landmark was a memory. When I finally pulled up to the curb, the first thing I saw was the for sale sign on the lawn. It had a big sold banner slapped across it, courtesy of Ben Realty Group, of course. Ben had obtained his real estate license a few years back, and it was clear he was exploiting our family tragedy for his flagship listing. It made me sick. I used my old key. It still worked. The moment I stepped inside, the changes hit me like a physical assault. The warm, inviting home of my memory was gone, replaced by a cold, sterile showroom of gray and beige. It was a house with no soul. Well, look what the cat dragged in, Sarah stated. She was standing in the archway to the living room, a glass of wine in her hand. Ben was lounging on a new leather couch that looked completely out of place, scrolling through his phone. Where is he? I inquired, my voice flat. Your father is resting, Sarah said sharply. The doctor stated he needs his peace and quiet. You can't just barge in here and upset him. I'm his son, I stated, my jaw tightening. I'm going to see my father. The next few weeks were a grueling battle of wills. Sarah and Ben did everything they could to keep me away from him. They'd tell me he was sleeping when he was awake. They'd intercept calls from his old friends. They scheduled his doctor's appointments without informing me. It was a systematic campaign of isolation designed to keep him under their complete control. But I was stubborn. I took a leave of absence from work and stayed. I slept on the old pull-out couch in the basement, the one place they hadn't bothered to renovate. I learned their schedules. When they were out, I'd slip into my dad's room. He was so much smaller than I remembered. The cancer had consumed him, leaving a frail, tired man in its wake. Some days he was lucid and we'd talk about my work, about baseball, about anything other than the two people in the next room. On those days, I saw flashes of the dad I knew. The kind man who taught me how to ride a bike and build a model airplane. One afternoon, I found him sitting by the window looking out at the yard. He was holding something in his hand. When I approached, I saw it was a small, faded photograph of my mother taken on their honeymoon. He looked so young, so happy. When he saw me, he flinched and quickly tried to conceal it, as if he'd been caught doing something wrong. It's okay, Dad, I said softly. Tears welled in his eyes. I miss her, Alex, he whispered. I made so many mistakes. That was the first crack in the wall he built around himself. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated truth. And it was more painful than any argument. He knew what he'd done. He knew he'd let Sarah erase the memory of the woman in the photograph. And he was drowning in the guilt. The end came faster than any of us expected. One night, a hospice nurse called me downstairs. He didn't have much time. I rushed to his side. Sarah and Ben were already there, their faces arranged in masks of performative grief. I pushed past them and took my dad's hand. His breathing was shallow, his eyes cloudy with medication. He struggled to focus on me. He squeezed my hand, a flicker of strength I didn't think he still possessed. Alex, he rasped, his voice barely audible. He was fighting for every word. Greystone, trust. Elizabeth, Sarah shot a sharp look at him. Richard, don't tire yourself out. He ignored her. His eyes locked on mine. The desperation in them was terrifying. Elizabeth, for you, she knew. He coughed, a terrible, racking sound. See Harrison. Promise me, Alex. See my lawyer, no matter what. Promise. I promise, Dad, I stated. My throat thick with tears. I promise. He sagged back against the pillows, a faint hint of relief on his face. He was gone within the hour. The funeral was a charade, orchestrated by Sarah and Ben. It was all about appearances. A spectacle for their friends. It wasn't about him. A week later, we were all gathered in a stuffy conference room for the reading of the will. Me, Sarah, Ben, and their lawyer, my dad's lawyer, a kind, elderly man named Mr. Harrison, whom I remembered from my childhood, presided. The will was short and brutal, a few personal effects, and a token sum of $75,000 were left to me. The rest of the estate, the stocks, the savings, and the valuable Chicago Greystone was left solely to my beloved wife. Sarah let out a small, theatrical sigh, dabbing at a dry eye. Ben put a comforting arm around her, though he couldn't hide the triumphant smirk on his face. They had won, they had gotten everything. I felt nothing, just a strange, hollow emptiness. I remembered my father's desperate face, his last words, promise. As Sarah and Ben got up to leave, already discussing a celebratory dinner, Mr. Harrison cleared his throat. Alex, he stated, his eyes meeting mine. Could you stay for a moment? There's another matter to discuss. Sarah paused at the door, a flicker of suspicion on her face. What other matter? Just some old family paperwork. Mr. Harrison said smoothly. It won't take long. She shrugged, her greed overriding her suspicion. She and Ben walked out, their laughter echoing down the hall. They were walking out of the room, but they were also walking right into the trap my parents had set for them more than 20 years ago. The door clicked shut, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. The conference room felt different once Sarah and Ben were gone. The air, which had been thick with tension and false grief, suddenly felt lighter. Mr. Harrison gestured for me to sit down. He had a gentle, sad smile on his face. Your father was a complicated man, Alex, he began, steepling his fingers on the polished table. He loved you very much, but he was also a man haunted by grief, and it made him weak. I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. He knew it, Mr. Harrison continued, deep down. He knew he wasn't strong enough to stand up to Sarah, but your mother was brilliant. And she was a fighter. She saw the future. He slid a thick, leather-bound folder across the table toward me. Years before she passed, when she first got her diagnosis, your mother and I worked on this. She had a premonition. She knew your father would be vulnerable after she was gone. She wanted to protect you and to protect her legacy. This, he tapped the folder, is the Greystone Irrevocable Trust. He explained it in simple terms. An irrevocable trust is like an iron box. Once you put something inside and lock it, you can't take it out again. Years ago, my mother had legally placed the house into this trust. The terms were simple. My father, Richard, was the lifetime beneficiary, meaning he could live in it for the rest of his life. But the moment he passed away, ownership of the house, every brick, every floorboard, every nail transferred immediately and automatically to me, Alex, the successor beneficiary. The house was never part of his will. It was never part of his estate. It was never his to give away. It had been mine, legally and absolutely, from the second he drew his last breath. His will was a performance, Mr. Harrison explained, a piece of theater to keep Sarah satisfied, to prevent her from challenging anything or trying to destroy the house's value out of spite. Your father's final act was to follow the script. Your mother wrote for him. He then handed me a sealed envelope. It was my dad's handwriting. Inside was a letter, pages and pages long. It was a confession, an apology, and a love letter to both my mother and me. He explained his weakness, his guilt, his regret. And he gave me a final gift. He told me about a hidden wall, safe behind a painting in his old study, my mother's favorite painting, one Sarah had overlooked. The combination was my birthday. Inside, he wrote, were my mother's journals and all the jewelry she had wanted me to have. He had saved them from Sarah's purge. I sat there, the letter in my trembling hands, and finally let myself cry. I wasn't crying from sadness, but from a profound, overwhelming sense of love and relief. My parents hadn't abandoned me. They had protected me in the only way they knew how. So what now? I asked, wiping my eyes. Now, Mr. Harrison stated, a glint in his eye, we let them spring the trap on themselves. Ben is a licensed realtor. He's arrogant. He'll cut corners to get a fast commission. Let them list the house. Let them find a buyer. Let them go all the way to the closing table. And then we show up. The strategy was brilliant. It was ruthless. It was exactly what they deserved, but I couldn't just wait. I needed to do something. The next day, I drove to the county records office. It took some digging, but I found it, the original deed transferred to the trust, signed by my mother and father. I held the copy in my hand. It felt like holding a shield. Then I did something for myself. I went back to the house, telling Sarah I was retrieving the last of my belongings from the basement. But instead, I went into the backyard to the small, overgrown patch of earth that used to be my mother's rose garden. Sarah had let it turn to weeds. I spent the rest of the afternoon on my hands and knees, pulling up nettles and thorns, clearing the soil. My hands got dirty, my back ached, but it felt good, felt like I was reclaiming something. Ben found me there as the sun was setting. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he sneered. "Landscaping for the new owners, don't bother, they're planning on paving over this whole yard for a pool." I looked up at him from the dirt. My face streaked with sweat. I just smiled. It was a genuine smile this time, full of a confidence he couldn't possibly comprehend. "You'd be surprised what can grow back, Ben, if the roots are strong enough." He just shook his head in disgust and walked away. He thought I was a pathetic loser digging in the dirt. He had no idea I was digging the grave for his entire smug, fraudulent world. The closing was in 1 week. The day of the closing was gray and overcast. A classic Chicago sky that perfectly matched the mood of impending doom. I met Mr. Harrison in a coffee shop, a block away from the title company's downtown office. He was wearing his best suit, and he had a briefcase that looked like it meant business. "Ready, Alex?" he asked, handing me a coffee. "I've been ready for 10 years, I stated. We walked in 5 minutes. After the scheduled closing time, a calculated move to ensure everyone was already there, and they were. The conference room was buzzing with a quiet, professional energy. There was Sarah, dressed in a gaudy designer outfit, looking like the cat who got the cream. There was Ben, slick and self-satisfied, schmoozing with his own lawyer, and there was my father, Richard, looking tired and gray, a passenger in his own life, sitting opposite them. Opposite them was an innocent-looking middle-aged couple, the Kellys, their faces full of the nervous excitement of new homebuyers. A title agent, a sharp woman in her 50s, sat at the head of the table, a mountain of paperwork in front of her. Our entrance silenced the room. "Alex," Sarah snapped, her face twisting in annoyance. "What are you doing here? This is a private meeting. I'm just here to make sure everything goes smoothly with the sale of my house," I stated calmly, pulling out a chair and sitting down. Mr. Harrison sat next to me, placing his briefcase on the table with a solid, definitive thud. Ben laughed, a short, ugly sound. "Your house, I think the will was pretty clear on that." "You're delusional." The title agent, whose name was Ms. Albright, looked up, frowning. "Excuse me. Is there a problem here?" "No problem at all," Sarah stated, waving a dismissive hand at me. "This is just my disgruntled stepson. Security can show him out, Mr. Harrison leaned forward. "That won't be necessary," he said, his voice calm but carrying an authority that commanded the room's attention. He opened his briefcase and pulled out the leather-bound folder. He slid it across the table to Ms. Albright. "I believe you'll find this pertinent to the proceedings," he stated. "This is the certificate of trust for the Greystone Irrevocable Trust, established in 1999. I suggest you look at Article 4, Section B. Regarding the successor beneficiary." Ms. Albright opened the folder. Her professionally placid face slowly began to change. As she read, her eyes widened slightly. She looked from the document to me, then back to the document. She picked up a file from her own stack, the preliminary title report. She started flipping through it, her frown deepening. "Our initial search showed the property in Richard Miller's name," she murmured, more to herself than to anyone else. "If you look at the full title chain, which I have a certified copy of right here," Mr. Harrison said, producing another document, "you'll see the property was transferred out of his personal ownership and into the trust on the same day. Your company's search must have been incomplete." He stated the word with a subtle emphasis that was a direct shot at Ben and his cut-rate methods. Ben's face started to lose its color. That's just some old piece of paper. The will is the final document." Ms. Albright looked up, her expression now cold and all business. She looked directly at Ben's lawyer. "An irrevocable trust supersedes a will. The assets in the trust are not part of the probated estate. You should know that." She then turned to the room at large, her voice clear and unequivocal. "This document is legally binding. According to this, the lifetime beneficiary, Richard Miller, passed away on October 12th. At that exact moment, sole and legal ownership of the property at 427 North Elm Street transferred to the successor beneficiary." She paused and looked directly at me. "Mr. Alex Miller." Silence, a thick, suffocating silence. Then chaos. "That's impossible," Sarah shrieked, jumping to her feet. "He's lying. That's a forgery, I assure you, madam. These documents are all certified by the state of Illinois, Mr. Harrison said coolly. Ben was white as a sheet. His career was flashing before his eyes. He had listed and sold a property his client had no legal right to sell. The lawsuits would be astronomical. He looked like he was going to be sick. The Kellys. The poor buyers just stared, their faces a mixture of confusion and horror. Their dream home had vanished in a puff of legal smoke, but my eyes were on my father. He wasn't yelling, he wasn't protesting. He just sat there, slumped in his chair, his face as gray as the Chicago sky. He looked at me, and in his eyes, I saw the full, crushing weight of his failure. He had known. Maybe he'd let himself believe it wouldn't matter, that Sarah's greed could somehow bend reality, but in that moment he knew the game was up. He had betrayed his wife's memory, he had betrayed his son, and in the end, it was all for nothing. He looked utterly and completely broken. Ms. Albright closed the folder with a sharp snap that made everyone flinch. This sale cannot proceed, she announced. There is no legal transfer of title to be made from the sellers. She looked at me. Congratulations, Mr. Miller, it seems the house is yours. The immediate aftermath in that conference room was a blur of controlled panic. Ms. Albright was speaking in low, urgent tones to the devastated Kellys. Ben's lawyer was frantically trying to get his client to stop stammering about a misunderstanding. And Sarah was vibrating with a rage so pure it was almost impressive. She rounded on me, her face a mask of fury. You did this? You schemed behind our backs after everything we did for you. I stood up, meeting her gaze without flinching for the first time. I wasn't the scared kid she could dismiss. I was the man who owned her entire world. Everything you did for me, or everything you did to me. I stated, my voice quiet but cutting through the noise. Let's be very clear. You tried to steal my mother's house. You failed. I then turned to my father, who still hadn't moved, and to Ben, who was now staring at the floor as if hoping it would swallow him whole. I want you out of my house, I stated. The words felt incredible to utter. My house. You have 2 weeks to gather your things and leave. 2 weeks, Sarah shrieked. That's impossible. We live there. You were perfectly happy to have the Kellys move in next week, Mr. Harrison pointed out dryly. Consider it a generous extension. There was nothing more to say. We turned and walked out, leaving the wreckage behind us. The final confrontation happened that night. I went back to the house to find them in the living room, surrounded by half-packed boxes. The atmosphere was thick with resentment. Sarah tried a new tactic. Tears. Alex, how could you do this to us, to your father? We're family. Family doesn't try to disinherit each other, Sarah. I replied, unmoved. Family doesn't erase the memory of a dead woman for new furniture. That's when I turned to my father. He finally looked up at me, his eyes pleading. Alex, I'm sorry, are you? I inquired, my voice devoid of emotion. I walked over to a bookshelf, pulled out a small, leather-bound photo album and opened it to a specific page. I placed it on the coffee table in front of him. It was a picture of the three of us, him, me, and my mom at my 5th birthday party. We were all smiling, covered in cake and joy. It was an image from a different lifetime. Are you sorry you did it, or are you just sorry you got caught? I asked him directly. I need you to tell me. I need you to look at this picture and tell me what you were thinking. He stared at the photo, and his carefully constructed composure finally shattered. A sob escaped him, a raw, ugly sound of a man completely undone. I don't know, he cried, his face in his hands. After she was gone, everything was just gray. Sarah brought color back. It was easier. It was just easier. I was a coward, Alex. I was a coward. And I failed you both. It was the truth. Finally, the ugly, painful, pathetic truth. He hadn't been a monster. He had been weak, and in some ways, that was worse. I listened to him cry. I felt a pang of pity, but it was distant, like an echo. The gaping wound of his betrayal was still too fresh. I heard you, I stated, my voice soft but firm, but I can't fix this for you. That's your work to do. I looked from him to Sarah, to Ben. 2 weeks, I reiterated. Then I turned, walked out the front door, and didn't look back. I had drawn the line for the first time in my life. I was the one in control. The house was mine now. I had to figure out what that really meant. The 2 weeks passed in a tense, silent truce. I stayed at a hotel, giving them space to pack up the life they had tried to steal. On the final day, I returned to an empty, eerily quiet house. They were gone. All of Sarah's cold, modern furniture had vanished, leaving behind dusty outlines on the floor and a profound sense of emptiness. It wasn't a triumphant return, it was haunting. The house felt like a battlefield after the fighting was over, scarred and silent. Remembering my father's letter, I went to his old study. The painting he'd mentioned, a landscape of the Oregon coast my mother loved, was still there, ignored by Sarah. My heart pounded as I lifted it off the wall. Behind it was the small metal dial of a wall safe. My hands trembled as I entered my birthday. A quiet click and the small door swung open. Inside was a velvet pouch and a stack of leather-bound journals. I opened the pouch first. My mother's jewelry spilled into my palm, her simple wedding band, the locket she always wore, the sapphire earrings that matched her eyes. I closed my hand around them, feeling the cold metal warm against my skin. It felt like holding a piece of her. Then I opened the journals. They were my mother's, page after page of her beautiful architectural handwriting, her sketches, her thoughts. On design, on life, on me. Tucked inside the last one was a letter addressed to me, written just weeks before she died. It was a letter of love, of hope, telling me to be strong, to be kind, and to never let anyone extinguish my light. I sat on the floor of that empty room and read and wept. This was the real inheritance, not the bricks and mortar, but this, the proof of a love so strong it had reached across time and death to save me. A few days later, my Aunt Clara came to visit. She walked in, took one look at the empty house, and enveloped me in a hug that felt like coming home. "I'm so proud of you, Alex," she stated, her voice thick with emotion. "You knew, didn't you?" I asked about the trust. She nodded. "Your mother made me promise. I was the backup in case Harrison couldn't get to you. My job was to stay on the outside, to watch. Sarah would have seen me as a threat if I got too close. Staying away was the hardest thing I've ever had to do." Then she handed me a small, worn bank book. Speaking of which, I opened it. It was a savings account in her name with a record of transfers, $500 here, $1,000 there, all sent to my account over the 4 years I was in college. Always during the toughest times when rent was due or textbooks were expensive, all those anonymous deposits I could never explain. "That was you," I whispered, stunned. "A promise is a promise," she stated, echoing my own words. Family looks after family. In that moment, I understood what family truly was. It wasn't just blood, it was a choice, a promise, an action. The next week, I called the Kellys, the couple who had tried to buy the house. I met them for coffee and explained everything. They were gracious and understanding. They had loved the house, they said, because it had a good soul. They could feel it even through Sarah's sterile renovations. I saw the disappointment in their eyes, and an idea began to form, an idea that felt right. That felt like something my mother would do. "I'm not going to sell it," I told them. "I'm going to stay. I'm going to bring it back to what it was meant to be." I pulled out one of my mother's journals, opened it to a sketch of a beautiful, light-filled sunroom she had designed but never gotten to build. "I'm going to finish her work." But I added, seeing their faces, "I know you're looking for a home, not just a house. My mother was an architect. I'm an architect. I'd be honored to help you find a place and design something wonderful for you, no charge. Consider it an apology for the mess you were dragged into." Their faces lit up. It was a new beginning, not just for them, but for me. I wasn't just reclaiming my past. I was starting to build my future. I was finally ready to stop being a ghost in my own life and start being the architect of it. The weeks that followed were filled with hard work. I started by tearing out all of Sarah's cheap gray carpeting, revealing the original hardwood floors my mother had so lovingly restored. I spent weekends sanding, staining, and bringing the wood back to its warm, honey-colored glow. The house started to breathe again. Every scraped knuckle, every sore muscle felt like an act of healing. I was in the middle of priming the living room walls, covered head to toe in white paint, when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find my father standing on the porch. He looked older, smaller, and profoundly tired. He held a small toolbox in his hand, the old one he used to use for projects around the house on Saturdays. He didn't make excuses. He didn't ask for anything. He just looked at the half-painted walls, then at me. "I heard you were fixing the place up," he stated, his voice quiet. I was always good at cutting in the edges. I stood there for a long moment, the paintbrush heavy in my hand. Every instinct screamed at me to slam the door, to tell him it was too late. The hurt was still there, a deep, resonant ache. I looked past him at the rose garden I had cleared, where the first green shoots were starting to push through the soil. Healing wasn't about forgetting. It wasn't about pretending the betrayal never happened. Maybe healing was about making the choice to let something new grow in the space where something was broken. I wouldn't forget what he did, couldn't, but maybe I could forgive the man he was trying to become. I stepped back from the door, holding it open. "I could use a hand," I stated. He looked up, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something that wasn't shame or guilt in his eyes. It was hope. He gave me a small, hesitant nod and stepped inside. Back into the house he had lost. He picked up a brush. We painted for the rest of the afternoon in silence. It wasn't a comfortable silence, but it was a start. It was the first stroke of paint on a new canvas. My inheritance wasn't just a house. It was a legacy of love and forgiveness, of failure and second chances. It wasn't a finished masterpiece. It was a work in progress. And for the first time, I felt like I had all the tools I needed to help build it. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it touched you in some way. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to fight for what was rightfully yours? Share your story in the comments below.